Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today in the show, we have Christine Ko. She is a dermatopathologist, and she wrote the KevinMD article, Confession from a Female Doctor, I Am Sexist. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
Sure. I always wanted to be a doctor. I know it's sort of a stereotype thing for, I'm Korean, I'm Korean American. And so it can be a stereotype for Asians to be doctors, but it was really something that I wanted to do from fourth grade when I read about Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female doctor in the US. And I'm just sort of always thought I'd actually be in internal medicine like you, sort of found dermatology late in medical school and enjoyed it. And then I always thought I would be in private practice doing dermatology, and then really got interested in dermatopathology and looking at skin biopsies under the microscope, and still thought I would mainly go into private practice and do dermatology and look at the biopsies that I do, and then somehow ended up here in academic dermatology and dermatopathology.
So I think you're the first dermatopathologist that I've had on the show. So tell me about your training path, as well as some of the typical cases that you see on a given day.
So dermatopathology is something I love. It's really looking at skin specimens under the microscope. And the training, it's kind of cool because you can be trained in dermatology and go into dermatopathology, which is a 1 or 2 year fellowship, or you can train in pathology and go into dermatopathology. So dermatopathologists are usually they've either done a dermatology residency or pathology residency. So it's cool to see different perspectives because I think the two residencies are fairly different. So what I typically see under the microscope, I see a fair amount of skin cancer in this country because, lighter skin and sun exposure, things like that, although skin cancer can really affect any skin type. And I also see a lot of inflammatory things. So, I think a lot of people are familiar with eczema. So I'll see that, or there are other rarer skin diseases like cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, or things with even longer names like pityriasis rubra-pilaris. So, lots and lots of different diseases to have fun with, I guess, in terms of visual recognition. I also see patients as a dermatologist, but so the contrast for it is really fun for me to see patients who are live in front of you. Well, sometimes through COVID, we've seen in telehealth, but, they come and they have their own experiences and emotions, and contrast that with, when I'm standing at my microscope and I look at slides of these, real life, people with emotions and stuff, but the slides don't have emotions. There's no deadline. There's no like, okay, look at the slide at 2:00 and be done by 2:30. So it's sort of a fun contrast for me to think about visual recognition in terms of sort of a discrete object, and then how the interaction goes when a patient's right in front of you.
So walk me through, say, like a typical week. I guess what proportion of your week is seeing patients, and what proportion is looking at slides and pathology samples?
Right. So every derm-trained dermatopathologist is different. And I know plenty who do, like, say, 50-50. They do half and half. For me right now, I mostly do dermatopathology, and I see patients on a Tuesday. So COVID has really disrupted a lot of people's schedules. So I used to do dermatopathology generally 3 days a week, and I would have an so-called academic day where I wouldn't get new cases, and I would have patients on Tuesday. With COVID, it's been different. Sometimes I have 8 other colleagues in dermatopathology, and so we share the load of sort of what comes in daily. And although a lot of clinics were closed in the Northeast early on during COVID, our dermatopathology lab always stayed open. So initially, since many clinics were closed, and that's where most of the biopsies come from, we had low volume, and 2 people could generally handle it. But right, everything was slower. The mail system slower. Our staffing was small, as small as possible to keep people, socially distanced and just out of the office if necessary. So just everything took a little longer. And I think as people have seen across the country, things are coming back towards normal somewhat. But yeah, I think in some ways there hasn't been really a typical week anymore for me given COVID, but I still do see patients on Tuesdays.
All right, let's transition into the KevinMD article that you wrote. It's titled Confession from a Female Doctor, I Am Sexist. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Well, writing, I think, is therapeutic for me. It helps me deal with sort of stressors. That article was sort of, in some ways, something that was what surprised me, I suppose, because my husband was actually washing the dishes after dinner. So he was doing a household chore. And so I would say, sort of, if we think of sexism as having sort of a traditional sort of sense of gender, traditional meaning whatever it is, sense of gender roles, and that women do one thing and men do another. If you think of washing dishes as sort of a woman's job, then he was not being sexist at all. He's standing there washing dishes. But he made this comment that during COVID, my son, who's 11, has been at different times pretty unhappy with the dinner that I make. And so he had sort of been unhappy that night. And so as my husband was washing the dishes, he was commenting, oh gosh, I hope, he can find a girlfriend who can prepare meals that he enjoys, instead of, always complaining. And that wasn't a slam against my cooking. He was just sort of saying, gosh, is he going to be able to find someone who's going to cook for him and satisfy his taste buds? And I just sort of laughed, but in the moment I said something, I guess, kind of offensive. I was like, wow, you're so sexist for saying that. And what I meant was really, like, either couldn't he learn how to cook for himself to make himself happy as he grows older? And maybe he's lucky he finds a partner who is happy to cook for him. But really, is it his, hypothetical girlfriend's job? And I if we didn't get in a fight, which I also was happy about, because I immediately said, oh, I'm sorry, because he looked shocked when I said that, because I don't actually, sort of just something I blurted out. I don't actually really think he's sexist, but I will say I realized in reflecting on that afterward that both he and I grew up in Korean American households where our mothers did do everything related to the house, and that was the model sort of that we grew up with. And I realized from that one experience how much, I always knew I was influenced by it, but I realized how much I personally am influenced by that. And I internally really think that the household stuff is my job. And even when he's doing dishes, I think, oh, he's helping with my stuff, not he's just, working in a partnership. So, and that's my problem, not his. And so it was sort of a realization that I blurted out that he was sexist, and really I'm probably more of a culprit at boxing myself into having sort of traditional gender roles at home than he is. And so even though kind of it was like sort of this cognitive implicit bias that sort of came up directed at him, I realized it really should have been something that I said to myself.
So tell me, what are some of the things that you and your husband are doing to kind of press back or push back against these traditional gender roles and the feelings associated with it?
It's a work in progress. I would say that I'm no expert, and I wouldn't want to be hypocritical about it, because really, I think I realized in thinking about the article and writing that I really do take on a lot of that feeling that I think has been in the popular media that many women, not just Korean American, many women have, that we need to be great wives and great mothers, and if we work outside the home, also be great at that. And there's this sort of, I guess, perfectionistic tendency that is really, for myself, I would say, not to speak for anyone else, is created in my own head, based on my experiences growing up and things like that, not to solely blame my childhood or my own parents or anything, but that's something I think about. And so I'm trying with my husband to ask and say, can you do this, and ahead of time, but also I think just to try to get him to step up without me having to ask, in the way that he's very accomplished. He works outside the home as well and doesn't need me to tell him at work to do X, Y, or Z. And so in that sense too, at home, we'll just look around, like what needs to be done. And so that's something that we're trying to work on together. But I think one of the biggest barriers also, in addition to how we both grew up, is just we're busy. So I definitely get caught up more than him in whatever thing I'm doing, whether it's for work or with the kids. And I think it's just easy to fall into habits when we're busy.
There are some studies that say that traditional gender roles have put an inordinate amount of work on female physicians, and that has slowed down some of their career aspirations. Now, from your standpoint, what's your thoughts on that?
I will go on the record as saying that I think being a mom and working outside the home is really hard. Saying that, though, I'm not saying that to mean that people shouldn't do it, and that I don't have, sort of that mom guilt that it seems like 100% of moms do have, and maybe 100% of dads also do have. Maybe it's just 100% of whoever parents has it, because there are no standardized answers for how to parent. I think there's lots of books on it, but there's no one size fits all model. For me, though, I think when I say that I'm going on the record saying it's hard, it just helps me personally to know that it's a really hard thing that I'm doing, and to accept that I will fail, and then I can learn from it and hopefully do better next time. And so I think that's something that I didn't learn as a child in school, really. I don't know if you're familiar with Carol Dweck and her concept of a growth mindset. But I think that's what I've been really trying. Once I learned about it, my sister, who's a clinical psychologist, is the one who first sent me the book when my daughter, who I have an older daughter who's 14, when she was young, she's like, oh, this is really important in terms of, how, raising your kids. But I realized when reading it, I'd never heard of the concept before. The concept of a growth mindset just means when there's a challenge, don't just think, oh, this is hard for me because I'm not good enough, basically. So parenting is hard because I'm not a great mom. Parenting is hard because it's hard, in my opinion. And so that's the way I think of it. And there are going to be challenges, and then learn from them, and when I fail, just try to learn from it. And that's the growth mindset. Whereas I think somehow, not to put blame on anything, but one of the things that's habit for me, I think, before reading this book about growth mindset, is my upbringing was more of a fixed mindset. That's the opposite of a growth mindset, where like you're told you're smart, for example, and maybe you are smart, but you still have to work hard. Good grades don't just fall out of the sky. It is still, something is still going to be hard for someone who's smart. And just because they get, like, God forbid, a B or C or something, doesn't mean they're not smart anymore. It's just that one test or whatever, that material was challenging, or maybe they didn't study or something. And so there are ways around it. So, and I don't know exactly how it happened, whether it was cultural or just me or, upbringing or whatever, but I think I know that I definitely grew up with a fixed mindset, and I didn't necessarily enjoy having challenges put in front of me. And so maybe in some ways that's why also parenthood just slammed me to the floor, because I would say, I found internship hard, residency was not easy either for its own reasons, but I never experienced anything like being a parent. So God bless all parents.
Well, I definitely hear what you're saying, because I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old daughter as well. So I certainly can empathize with what you're saying. So let me ask, what are some of the things that you did to transform from that fixed mindset to a growth mindset, other than reading the book?
Interestingly, I think one of the things that really helped me was that actually, my son is deaf and has cochlear implants. And so he did not have spoken language even at age 2 when he got them. And so it was about a 4-year journey to work with him on speech and language. And we did that as a family with an auditory verbal therapist who specialized in it. But basically, the whole concept of auditory verbal therapy, I realized with reflecting on it, is about a growth mindset. It's like, you can't say this word or syllable or phrasing yet, and you work on it. And so there were always these measurable goals that we had each week, because we would meet with the therapist either once or twice a week, because we met 6 times a month, and we would have daily homework. And we had these measurable goals. And so it was like, I would see my son fail at something or me fail at being patient. And, you just realize, okay, the next time we try, it's another session, it's another effort. And I slowly realized that, he now he developed age matched, speech and language after about 4 years of this work. And of course we were seeing progress all along, but it sort of opened my eyes to, yeah, this is really hard, but look what this work creates. It pays off. But it was really, I think I had such a fixed mindset that it really took this prolonged period of, you set this goal, you fail, you try, you reach it. Okay, then you set this goal and you fail and you try. Because each time there was failure, and it was each time, well, we try again. And so I think really that's how I learned. And I saw how, I could either complain about it, or as I recently read in another self-help book, is like, I guess they say it in, I think, the Marines, maybe. It's like, embrace the suck. It's like hard, but if it means enough to you, you can do it. And I realized there are certain things that really do mean a lot to me. Being a parent as good as I can be through the failures, being a great wife and mom and person, and doing the best by my patients that I can.
We're talking to Christine Pho. She's a dermatopathologist, and she wrote the KevinMD article, Confession from a Female Doctor, I Am Sexist. Christine, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
I think maybe a simple way to put it would be, even though the title of my article is I Am Sexist, kind of going along with what we've spoken on and a growth mindset and things like that, I can change that I am, and I can change it to I am, converting over from being sexist, or I am trying hard to not think about traditional roles all the time, or I am trying hard not to put this perfectionist standard on how I parent and how I try to achieve, some sort of work-life balance.
Christine, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.